For anyone who didn't realize, this is why CPI can't be trusted. I've been meaning to make a video about CPI and inflation, and then the perfect tweet just came across my screen today that encapsulates exactly what I want to say. Meat and egg prices are skyrocketing. So what does the Fed do? Lower the weighting percentage of them in the CPI, of course. So for anyone who doesn't know, CPI is the government measure of inflation. They take a weighted average of prices for a basket of goods and services that represent typical consumer spending. Then they measure the price changes of that basket over time, and then they tell you what the inflation rate is. First of all, anyone who knows anything about inflation knows they should just be tracking and telling you the rate and growth of the money supply. That's what inflation is. But no, instead they have this juiced up CPI measure that they're going to pick a specific market basket of goods and then track that and tell you how the prices change. And that's going to be representative of inflation across the whole economy. Well, if you've ever listened to Michael Saylor talk, or you've ever thought about it for more than 5 minutes yourself, you understand that inflation cannot be simply boiled down to one number. The basket of market goods and services is different for each person. If you want to buy good quality meat and go to concerts, your inflation rate is way different than if you just want to eat breakfast cereal and watch Netflix. Because the prices of things that are more scarce and more desirable go up faster, and the prices of cheap, low-quality things go up slower. If you want to buy shares of productive, high-growth companies, then your inflation rate is the growth rate of the S&P 500 or the Magnificent Seven. And if you want to buy a house, then, well, you're f***ed, because your inflation rate is skyrocketing as housing prices go through the roof. Back to CPI, though. If the government is going to track this metric and call it useful, you'd think the only way that would be accurate is if the goods in the basket stay the same. That would make sense. Your measurement's only as good as the unit you're using to measure. You can't compare apples to oranges, as we know. But do the goods in the basket stay the same? Of course not. And does the relative weighting of those goods in the basket stay the same? Of course not. Which, by the way, this is to be expected coming from a group of people who call a dollar a stable store of value and an accurate unit of account when the real value of a dollar is constantly changing anyways. So there's no better example of this than food, because we all have to eat, we all have to buy food. But if the price of meat and poultry and fish and eggs, high quality nutrient foods, goes up way too much, well, that would make their inflation numbers look really bad, wouldn't it? So what do? Well, they just change the makeup and the weighting of those items in the basket that they're measuring. Here's the example. The orange line is meats, poultry, fish, and eggs. Well, from September 2024 to January 2025, the weighting of those items in the basket has gone down. And the weighting of items that tend to be cheaper, easy to produce, maybe less nutritious, maybe lower quality, cereals and bakery goods, well, the weighting in the basket has gone up. Fruits and vegetables, weighting's gone down. But here's my point. Even if the weighting in the basket is technically warranted because consumer behavior is changing, people are buying less meat, they're buying less eggs, they're buying more breakfast cereals. It's the inflation in the first place that's making people make different choices. How much meat and eggs and poultry and fish is the average consumer buying? Oh, they're buying less. Well, I guess we need to change the weighting in the basket. No, they're buying less. Have you seen the prices of eggs lately? So we won't compare eggs and meat at today's prices to eggs and meat at last year's prices. We'll just say people are eating less meat and eggs and they're eating more breakfast cereal. Therefore, they're not experiencing as much inflation. Do you see how backward that is? Do you see how you're being gaslit on every level? Seyfedin Amous, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, he loves this topic, and he'll always tell you the CPI is a meaningless mathematical construct. It's promoted precisely because it understates inflation as people inevitably substitute inferior garbage for the goods they actually desire. For example, in 2021, the Fed graciously let you know that a Thanksgiving dinner serving poultry costs $1.42, but a soybean-based dinner serving with the same amount of calories costs 66 cents and provides almost twice as much protein. So if your Thanksgiving dinner gets too expensive, just have a soy-based Thanksgiving dinner next year. And Seyfedin would argue that this goes all the way back to the 70s. A closer look at historical trend of the U.S. government's suggested dietary guidelines since 1970s shows a continuous decline in the recommendation of meat and an increase in the recommendations of grains, legumes, industrial oils, and various other nutritionally poor foods that benefit from industrial economies of scale. So don't be fooled that inflation just means prices increasing, which of course it does. It also means the quality of everything you want to eat or buy is going down. Because the input cost for producers is inflating too. They have to find ways to cut corners and make cheaper, lower quality products. But the juicing of the CPI doesn't stop there. Have you ever heard the term hedonic adjustments? This is another way they juice the numbers more than Arnold in a Mr. Olympia competition. The official reasoning for hedonic adjustments is to help provide more accurate measures of inflation by accounting for quality improvements in products. Here's an example. In the US, the use of hedonic adjustments for smartphones led to a 24.13% decrease in the official CPI for telephone hardware over 2 years. Did you hear that? They said the quality of smartphones got better, so inflation has gone down. But did smartphone prices go down? Last time I bought one, they hadn't. But in the CPI calculation, they said, well, quality's gone up, so we've arbitrarily determined that equates to a 24% decrease in inflation, even though the actual prices went up. How does that make any sense? Sure, the price of a used smartphone has gone down, but that's because the quality has gone down and the product has depreciated. And the quality relative to a new smartphone has gone way down. Smartphones have increased in quality, but the companies correspondingly raise the prices. So people who defend hedonic adjustments would say, well, consumers getting more value for their money. Sure, a new smartphone is more powerful than an old one. The price still goes up. The consumer doesn't get a discount. They're just forced to pay more for advancements that they may not even need. Here's the most insidious part, in my opinion. We covered above how inflation leads to lower quality products, and the government encourages you to substitute high quality products for lower quality ones. And then they change the weighting of those products in the inflation calculation. So when product quality improves, the government lowers the inflation metric. But when product quality declines, they don't raise their inflation metric. Let me say that again. When the quality of the products goes up, they use hedonic adjustments to artificially adjust the inflation metric down. But when the quality of products goes down, do they use hedonic adjustments to artificially adjust the inflation metric up? Of course not. Somehow, hedonic adjustments only ever seem to reduce inflation. They never seem to raise it. So if a smartphone gets better, they say it's cheaper in real terms. But if a bag of chips shrinks while the price stays the same, do they adjust CPI upward? Of course not. There's nothing objective about that. There's nothing logical and sensical about it. It's nothing more than creative accounting. And somehow it always seems to come out making inflation look lower than it is. And you're stuck not being able to afford anything you want to buy. And instead of eating eggs for breakfast and meat for dinner, you're eating high fructose corn syrup mash for breakfast and insect bug soybean mash for dinner. Make it make sense. All right, if you like this video, please like it. Please subscribe to the channel. You got to help me bump the numbers up on the channel. Share with someone you think might enjoy it. Go stream this episode on multiple different people's devices. Talk to you next time.